Interestingly, Rawls does not discuss the univocity of justice as an attribute of God in humans, and he might have had more problems with that. In his view, justice is primarily a predicate of complete political societies, and the most important case of justice as an attribute of a human individual is that of supporting the justice of such a society as a member of it, accepting the fair share it assigns one in the burdens, opportunities, and risks of human life in such a society. That can hardly be a way in which God is just, apart from incarnation as a rational but quite finite social animal. Leibniz's political theory allows him more easily than may be possible for Rawls to predicate justice univocally of God and humans. He argues that the principle of God's justice will not be that of equity or that equality which obtains among men and which leads to the maxim to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. God's motive must rather be that of perfection, to aim at the good and at perfection so far as possible. In accordance with this judgment, Leibniz offers his favorite definition of justice. Justice is the charity of the wise. He adds that this follows from the nature of God, quote 2. Leibniz argues that this same motive has a place in truly virtuous and generous men whose supreme function it is to imitate divinity insofar as human nature is capable of it. This applies most easily, I suppose, to the case of a wise and benevolent magistrate. Equality and individual autonomy have a much smaller and less central place in his political vision than Rawls or the French Revolution would claim for them. It is clear that he expected the wise to be few. The just state would accordingly be paternalistic in a somewhat authoritarian way. Mandarins would have a large share in its government. In such a political vision, justice as the charity of the wise can, without obvious incongruity, be ascribed univocally to human magistrates and to God. Having defined justice as charity conformed to wisdom, Leibniz goes on to say that charity is a universal benevolence, and that benevolence is a disposition to love. That is, to find pleasure in the good, the perfection, and the happiness of another, because that's what he says love is, quote 3. How universal is charity's benevolence? Leibniz's answer is that it extends to all and only rational beings, not only the whole humankind, but rather the whole kind or genus of users of reason. That is also the domain of justice in his view. In 1696, he writes, quote 4, that justice is nothing but the order that is observed with regard to the evil and good of intelligent creatures. For justice, according to Leibniz, is a social virtue. It governs attitudes and actions in social relations among rational beings who can recognize each other as persons. Non-rational creatures are not included in the domain of justice. Strictly speaking, he says, rights belong only to intelligent beings, quote 5. This is connected with the fact that happiness of its objects is an essential end of charity, and hence of the motive of justice in Leibniz's view. When explaining the nature of justice as the charity of the wise, Leibniz sometimes mentions the happiness and the perfection, both the happiness and the perfection of the beloved, but commonly only the happiness as the end at which that charity aims. And he denied that non-rational creatures are capable of happiness or misery, strictly speaking, which is not, I think, to say that they have no pleasures or pains, and is certainly not to say that there is no good or perfection at all in their existence. Section 2, the city of God. Famously central to Leibniz's attempted vindication of God's goodness in creating this one of all possible worlds, despite all the evils it contains, is the claim that God did the right thing because this is the best of all possible worlds. The most troubling problem about this claim finds its classic expression in Candide's question. If this is the best of all possible worlds, what must the others be like? Voltaire scores, I think, a rhetorical but not a philosophical triumph in aiming his satire at the claim that this is the best of all possible worlds. Candide's question is motivated by human sufferings caused by earthquakes, diseases, crimes, and war crimes. But Leibniz can and does agree that such things often happen. See section 43 of the preliminary discourse. The best of all possible worlds might not be the most accommodating to human beings. In determining which world is best, one might argue, as Leibniz does in the Theodicy, that considerations of the good of intelligent creatures can in principle be outweighed on some points by considerations of the good or perfection to be realized in the existence of other, less excellent but more numerous creatures, and by considerations of order and harmony of the world as a whole. And if we can manage to step back in a way from our human point of view, some of us may even find it natural enough to regard the world as a whole as a marvelous thing, beautiful and awe-inspiring in its magnitude, variety, intricacy, and order, and perhaps even in its apparent making no exceptions for us. In a large metaphysical perspective, one might hesitate to say that it would be a better world if it were better for us. But that does not get Leibniz off Voltaire's hook, insofar as his project is to vindicate God's justice. For maximal goodness of the world as a whole is not sufficient to manifest God's perfect justice, which is a social virtue that can be manifested only in God's treatment of intelligent creatures or persons. Things might perhaps have gone somewhat better for rational creatures in a world that a creator, both charitable and wise, would choose for other reasons. Wisdom's regard for other values may limit the operation of charity's specific focus on the good of rational creatures. But the destiny of intelligent creatures in the best possible world must still be quite splendid on the whole, if justice is to be worth singling out for celebration as an attribute of the Creator. And Leibniz does insist that the happiness of intelligent creatures is the principal part of God's designs. Presumably, it must be one of the chief excellences of the best world. Or perhaps, if the most perfect possible world whole were a truly miserable place for intelligent creatures, then God would not have created anything at all. No less important for Leibniz's Theodicy, therefore, than his concept of the best possible world is his concept of the city of God. He says that God makes of minds the most excellent of conceivable governments, to which he refers as the city of God or the Republic of Minds. Its membership includes all intelligent beings, humans, intelligent extraterrestrials, if any. Leibniz supposes there probably are some. Also angels, assuming their existence, about which Leibniz says little. And God, too, as member and monarch of the city. As Leibniz says of it in the Principles of Nature and of Grace in 1714, quote 7, all minds, whether human or superhuman, as they enter into a kind of society with God, are members of the city of God, that is, of the most perfect state, formed and governed by the greatest and best of monarchs, where there is no crime without punishment, no good deeds without proportionate reward, and finally, as much virtue and happiness as is possible. It is in this city of God, and not least in its happiness, that the justice of God as a social virtue and a species of charity must be manifested. Accordingly, Leibniz is prepared to argue from God's perfection to the excellence of the city of God. He claims to have shown in the Theodicy, quote 8, that it is a consequence of the supreme perfection of the sovereign of the universe that the kingdom of God is the most perfect of all possible states or governments, and that consequently what little evil is there is required for